Pilot orders black woman to switch seats, not knowing she owns the entire airline. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the story. You'll need to move. Now. The words cut through the first-class cabin like a snapped cable, sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. She didn't look up. The black woman remained seated in 2A, legs crossed, posture effortless, a hardback book resting open in her hands. The cream-colored pages caught the cabin light as if nothing had changed, as if the voice behind her hadn't just tried to claim authority over her space. The pilot leaned in closer, one hand gripping the top of her seat. He wore the uniform perfectly pressed navy jacket, gold stripes at the cuff, confidence stitched into every inch of him. His jaw was tight, his patience thinner than the aisle between them. "Ma'am," he said again, louder this time, for witnesses. "That seat has been reassigned. You'll switch with the passenger behind you." A pause, the kind that makes a room hold its breath. Around them, heads turned, phones rose. The quiet luxury of first class, once insulated, polite, began to vibrate with anticipation. Behind the pilot stood a woman in a silver dress, fur draped over her shoulders like a crown. She smiled as she lifted her phone, framing the scene. Recording. Not intervening. Enjoying. Her laughter was soft, careless, the kind that assumes the ending is already decided. The black woman finally closed her book, gently, precisely. She placed it on her lap and looked up, not at the pilot's stripes, not at the smirk forming behind him, but straight into his eyes. "I'm not moving," she said. Not raised, not defiant, just final. A murmur rippled through the cabin. The pilot exhaled sharply, glancing around as if the audience itself had betrayed him. "This isn't a discussion," he snapped. "We have VIP guests. You're holding up departure." VIP guests. The phrase landed heavy. It always did. She studied his face, calm and unreadable. In her mind, a memory flickered another plane, another decade, another man in authority telling her she didn't belong where she had paid to be. Back then, she had stood up. Back then, she had moved. Back then, she had promised herself never again. Around them, passengers shifted. A man across the aisle pretended not to stare while angling his phone just enough. Someone whispered, "Is this really happening?" Another voice muttered, "She has a boarding pass, right?" The pilot leaned closer, lowering his voice but sharpening it all the same. "You can comply, or security can help you comply." That did it. The woman in silver laughed openly now, her camera trained on the seated figure. "Unbelievable," she said to her followers. "Some people really don't know their place." The black woman didn't react. She simply reached into her handbag and pulled out her phone. No trembling, no rush, one deliberate tap. "Rachel," she said quietly when the line connected. "Log this," the pilot scoffed. "Calling your lawyer won't change anything." She looked up at him again, this time with something else behind her eyes' recognition. Not of him, of the pattern. "No," she said, "but it will change everything." The cabin fell silent, because in that stillness, something shifted. The power the pilot thought he held began to thin. The certainty the woman in silver wore like perfume started to evaporate. And none of them, not the pilot, not the laughing passenger, not the dozens of witnesses now filming, had any idea that the woman they were trying to move was about to ground far more than a flight. She was about to ground careers. And this was only the beginning. She had boarded early, not because she needed the time, but because she preferred silence before motion. Seat 2A had been chosen weeks ago, paid in full under her real name. No assistant, no entourage, no announcement. Just a confirmation email and a boarding pass that scanned green like everyone else's. That was the point. She liked to see how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. Her name was Amara Blake. To the world, she was a billionaire whose signature could move markets and ground fleets. To this cabin, in this moment, she was just another black woman sitting alone in first class, well-dressed, composed, and immediately questioned. She had worn ivory on purpose, clean lines, no logos, no jewelry loud enough to invite assumptions, the kind of elegance that didn't beg for validation, the kind that unsettled people who relied on symbols to decide who mattered. As the pilot stood over her now, Amara noticed details others missed. The way his grip tightened on the seat when she didn't move, the way his eyes flicked briefly to the woman in silver as if seeking approval, the way authority, when challenged calmly, often revealed insecurity. She had seen it before. At 27, in a boardroom where she was mistaken for an assistant and asked to fetch coffee. At 34, when a banker questioned whether the shares were really hers. At 41, when a man half her experience explained her own company back to her. Each time, the same formula. Assumption, dismissal, escalation, and always, silence mistaken for submission. Around her, the cabin's energy continued to shift. Phones were now fully raised. The quiet hum of engines waiting at the gate felt louder, impatient. A flight attendant hovered near the galley, frozen between protocol and instinct. The pilot cleared his throat. "Last warning, ma'am. If you are con to the yay." Amara looked past him, out the window. The runway lights stretched into the distance like a promise. She thought of the first aircraft she had ever leased, old, inefficient, laughed at by competitors. She thought of the nights she spent rewriting contracts while others slept. She thought of the meetings where people smiled at her face and dismissed her power behind closed doors. She stood now not because she was yielding, but because she was done being spoken over. "I understand exactly what you're trying to do," she said, her voice carrying without effort. "And I'm telling you it won't work." The pilot stiffened. "You're being disruptive." "No," she replied. "I'm being still. You're the one creating a scene." A few passengers nodded unconsciously. Someone whispered, "She's right." The woman in silver rolled her eyes dramatically, still filming. "This is insane," she laughed. "Just move already." "Duman." Amara turned her head slowly, meeting the woman's gaze for the first time. The smile on the silver dress faltered just a fraction. There was something unsettling about being truly seen. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain herself. She simply said, "You might want to lower the phone." The woman laughed again, louder. "Or what?" Amara didn't answer. She had already said enough. Her phone vibrated softly in her hand. A single message from Rachel appeared on the screen. Logged. Cabin audio active. Board notified. Amara slipped the phone back into her bag. She sat down again. Not because she had lost, but because she had time. The pilot looked around, visibly frustrated now. The cabin no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the witnesses, to the cameras, to the moment slipping out of his control. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this flight wasn't just heading to another city, it was heading straight into a reckoning. And Amara Blake had built her entire career being patient enough to let people finish their mistakes. Part 2 ended with the cabin suspended between altitude and consequence, unaware that gravity was about to change direction. The delay was now official. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, followed by the captain's voice over the intercom, carefully neutral, deliberately vague. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief situation in the cabin. Please remain seated." A situation. That was the word they always used when things were slipping but not yet broken. The pilot, standing beside Amara, stiffened at the sound of his own authority being reduced to a euphemism. His jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this to take more than 30 seconds. He hadn't expected resistance, certainly not calm resistance. He leaned closer again, lowering his voice. But the edge was gone now, replaced by something sharper, fear. "You're delaying over 100 people," he hissed. "Is that what you want?" Amara looked up at him slowly. "You delayed them," she said. "The moment you decided I didn't belong here." That sentence landed differently. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit stopped recording and spoke aloud, unable to help himself. "She's got a point." A ripple followed. The flight attendant near the galley shifted her weight, eyes darting between the pilot and Amara. She had scanned the boarding pass herself. She had seen the green light. She had said nothing. Until now. "Sir," she said quietly, addressing the pilot, "her seat assignment is valid. The pilot shot her a look so sharp it could cut. Stay out of this. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was charged. Behind them, the woman in silver lowered her phone just enough to whisper to her companion, "This is getting out of hand." But she didn't stop recording. Not when views were climbing, not when the narrative still favored her. Another passenger spoke up, this one younger, nervous but resolute. "Why are we even arguing? Just check the system again." The pilot straightened, reclaiming posture if not control. "I already did." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Then do it again," she said, out loud. That was the moment the balance shifted. Because confidence thrives in private, but it falters in daylight. The pilot hesitated. Just a beat too long. Someone in the back laughed under their breath. Another phone came up, a third. Authority, once unquestioned, was now being audited by strangers with cameras. The pilot turned away abruptly, muttering something into his headset. Amara caught fragments operations, ground control, reassignment, not verification, avoidance. She leaned back in her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. She wasn't watching him anymore. She was watching the room. The witnesses were waking up. A woman 2 rows back whispered, "This feels wrong." Wazer, a man near the window, nodded. "It is," another voice added. "Why is she the only one being moved?" The question hung there, unanswered. Amara's phone vibrated again. She didn't look immediately. She didn't need to. She already knew the pattern. Escalation was coming. Security would be mentioned, procedures cited. Words like compliance and safety deployed like shields. They always were. She remembered another time years ago when a meeting had stalled because a man refused to believe she was the final decision-maker. She had let him talk, let him posture, let him double down. Then she had ended the conversation with one sentence. She would do the same here. The pilot returned, flanked now by a senior flight attendant. Older, sterner. The kind of presence meant to restore order. "Ma'am," the attendant said carefully, rehearsed calm masking irritation. "We need your cooperation." Amara looked up, meeting her gaze with quiet clarity. "You have it," she said, "as soon as you stop targeting me." The attendant blinked. That wasn't in the script. Around them, the cabin waited. No one scrolled anymore. No one pretended not to listen. This was no longer about a seat. It was about who got questioned and who didn't. And as the engines sat idle on the runway, one truth became unavoidable. Whatever this was supposed to be, it was no longer routine. It was a test, and the airline was failing it in real time. The cabin didn't erupt. It leaned forward. That was the difference. People weren't shouting. They weren't arguing. They were watching alert now, invested, aware that something fundamental was unfolding in front of them. The senior flight attendant cleared her throat, straightening her scarf like it might restore order. "Let's all take a breath," she said, projecting calm. "We're just trying to resolve a seating issue." Amara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked past the attendant, scanning the faces around her. Dozens of strangers. Different ages, accents, intentions, some uncomfortable, some curious, a few quietly angry. Then someone spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but "Her ticket is valid." The voice came from the galley. It belonged to the younger flight attendant, the one who had hovered earlier, the one who had scanned the boarding pass with her own hands. Her name badge caught the light as she stepped forward, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I checked it," she continued, voice shaking but steady enough. "Seat 2A. It scanned green. There was no error." The pilot snapped around. "You're mistaken." She swallowed. "I'm not." "Weef." A hush fell over the cabin. This wasn't a passenger anymore. This was staff. Inside the system, breaking rank, the woman in silver scoffed loudly, lifting her phone higher. "Oh, please. Since when do trainees run the flight?" The younger attendant flinched, but she didn't retreat. "I'm not running anything," she said. "I'm just telling the truth." That was all it took. The spell broke. A man in the 3rd row leaned into the aisle. "If her ticket's valid, why are we still talking about this?" Another voice followed. "Yeah, why is she being singled out?" Rare. A woman near the window lowered her phone and said quietly, "This feels like profiling." The word hung there. Profiling. The pilot's face hardened. That's a serious accusation. So is removing someone without cause, the man replied. The senior attendant raised her hands. Let's keep emotions out of this. Amara finally spoke again. Emotions aren't the problem, she said evenly. Assumptions are. She turned slightly toward the younger attendant. Thank you. The attendant nodded, eyes bright, breathing shallow. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and she knew it. The pilot stepped back, visibly recalculating. Authority was no longer one-directional. The cabin had become a mirror, reflecting every decision back at him. Amara felt it too, the shift she had learned to recognize over decades. This was the moment. The moment when silence stopped protecting the wrong people. Her phone vibrated once more. She glanced down this time. Rachel. Crew audio flagged. Multiple witnesses. Continue. Amara slipped the phone away. She stood not abruptly, not aggressively, but enough to command space. I want to be very clear, she said, her voice carrying without effort. I have complied with every instruction that applies to me. I have not raised my voice. I have not disrupted this flight. My clues. She looked at the pilot. You did. The cabin was completely still now. No laughter, no scoffing. Even the woman in silver had stopped smiling, though her phone remained raised, more uncertain than triumphant. The senior attendant exhaled slowly. Perhaps we should step aside and review this properly. That would have been wise 10 minutes ago, someone muttered. Amara didn't smile. She didn't need to, because the witnesses were no longer passive. They had names, voices, cameras, and now context. The pilot realized it at the same time she did. This was no longer about control. It was about accountability, and once that door opened, there was no closing it again. Part 4 ended not with a shout, but with something far more dangerous to unchecked power. People telling the truth out loud. That was when it crossed the line. Not with a shout, not with a threat, but with a hand. The pilot stepped forward again, impatience finally overpowering restraint. He reached for the armrest beside Amara's seat, fingers brushing too close to her wrist, as if proximity itself could coerce compliance. He said, voice clipped, controlled only by force of habit. This ends now. The younger flight attendant inhaled sharply. Sir. Enough, he snapped. That single movement, small, dismissive, invasive, sent a jolt through the cabin. Amara felt it instantly. Not fear. Recognition. Her body remembered before her mind did. Another airport. Another year. Another uniformed man standing too close, speaking too loudly, touching her boarding pass like it was contraband. She had been 30 then, newly wealthy, not yet armored by experience. She had moved that time. She had told herself it wasn't worth it. She never forgot how small that choice felt afterward. Do not touch me. Her voice was low, flat, absolute. The pilot froze, hand hovering midair. For a fraction of a second, no one breathed. Then the cabin erupted not in chaos, but in protest. Hey, you can't do that. Back up. Phones shot higher. Someone stood. Another passenger leaned into the aisle, blocking the pilot's advance without even realizing it. The woman in silver laughed nervously, trying to reclaim the moment. Oh, come on, don't be so dramatic. A man across the aisle turned on her. You're filming someone being harassed. That's the drama. Her smile vanished. The senior attendant stepped in quickly now, placing herself between the pilot and Amara. We're done, she said firmly. Step back. The pilot stared at her like she'd betrayed him. Amara remained seated, heart steady, eyes clear. She reached into her bag again, but this time she didn't pull out her phone. She pulled out a memory. 16 years old, Sunday dress, airport lounge. You need to wait outside. But I have a ticket. Outside. She remembered the heat in her face, the eyes on her, the quiet humiliation that followed her all the way to the gate. She looked up now, meeting the pilot's gaze. You've mistaken my silence for consent, she said. That's your mistake. The words landed like a verdict. Her phone buzzed persistent this time. She answered without lifting it to her ear. Rachel, she said calmly. They escalated. A pause. Then Rachel's voice, crisp and controlled, came through the speaker. Understood. Initiating. Protocol. If you ever N1, to place. The word protocol traveled fast. Passengers exchanged looks. The pilot stiffened. The senior attendant closed her eyes briefly as if bracing for impact. "What protocol?" the woman in silver demanded, her confidence cracking. Amara didn't look at her. She addressed the cabin. "For the record," she said, "I did not ask for this attention. I asked to be left alone in a seat I paid for." She turned to the pilot one last time. "You questioned my right to be here. You ignored verification. You touched me. And you did it in front of witnesses." Her voice never rose. "That's not policy," she continued. "That's prejudice." Silence swallowed the cabin whole. Then Rachel spoke again, clearer now, unmistakable. "Amara, the board is on standby." A few passengers gasped. Someone whispered her name. The pilot's face drained of color. The woman in silver lowered her phone for the first time. Because in that moment, right there at cruising altitude 0, everyone understood something had shifted irreversibly. This wasn't about optics anymore. This was about consequence. And Amara Blake had just reached the point where patience turned into action. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that ends careers. The word protocol changed everything. It didn't echo loudly. It didn't need to. It slipped into the cabin like a sealed envelope slid across a boardroom. Table quiet, official, irreversible. The pilot straightened instinctively, training kicking in. "What protocol?" he demanded, trying to reclaim altitude with volume. Rachel's voice came through Amara's phone again, calm as a surgical light. "Protocol 7B, executive-level incident escalation. All actions from this point are logged, monitored, and subject to immediate review." A few passengers exchanged looks. Someone whispered, "Executive level?" The senior flight attendant inhaled slowly. She had worked long enough to recognize that phrase. It wasn't used lightly, it wasn't used often, and it certainly wasn't triggered by mistakes. It was triggered by risk. Amara remained seated, hands folded, eyes steady. She wasn't watching the pilot anymore. She was listening to the shift in the room, to the subtle recalibration of power. "Rachel," she said evenly, "confirm cabin recording." Out was apathic. "Confirmed," Rachel replied. "Audio and visual from multiple angles. Passenger uploads archived. Crew headsets included." The woman in silver stiffened. "You're recording us?" Amara finally turned toward her. "No," she said. "You are?" A murmur rippled through the cabin. The pilot took a step back, then another, realizing too late that the ground beneath his authority was no longer solid. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, voice tight. "We can resolve this internally." "Isrees. Enwive." Amara looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "You had that option," she said. "You declined it." She stood now, not abruptly, not aggressively, but fully. The aisle seemed narrower with her in it. "I want the facts on record," she continued, voice carrying without strain. "My boarding pass was valid. A crew member confirmed it. I was asked to move without cause. I was touched after I refused. So," she paused, letting each sentence settle. "I did not escalate. You did." "If it doesn't bothers," Rachel spoke again, sharper now. "Amara, the board has authorized you to proceed." That was the moment the cabin understood. This wasn't a call to a lawyer. This wasn't a complaint line. This wasn't damage control. This was command. The pilot's mouth opened, then closed. The senior attendant lowered her gaze. The younger flight attendant stood frozen, heart racing, realizing she had just witnessed a turning point she would remember for the rest of her career. Amara stepped slightly forward, addressing the crew but speaking for the room. "When people say power is loud, they're wrong," she said. "Power is precise. It documents, it waits, and then it acts." She turned her phone so the screen faced outward, not to show contracts or titles, but to make one thing clear. She wasn't bluffing. "Rachel," she said, "freeze the flight." A beat. Flight operations paused, Rachel confirmed. "Replacement crew on standby." Gasps broke out. Someone muttered, "She can do that?" The pilot found his voice again, thin and strained. "You can't just—" "Yes," Amara interrupted softly. "I can." Silence fell thick, heavy, undeniable. The woman in silver sank back into her seat, phone lowering inch by inch. The narrative she thought she was filming had flipped on her. Amara turned back to the pilot one final time. You mistook authority for ownership, she said. That's a common error. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply let the truth stand where excuses used to be. Outside the window, the runway lights still stretched forward, but now the flight wasn't going anywhere. Because the moment had arrived. The quiet turn. The point where the story stops being about resistance and becomes about consequence. The silence after replacement crew on standby was different. It wasn't tense anymore. It was stunned. The pilot stood frozen in the aisle, posture still rigid, but the certainty that once held him upright was gone. His authority hadn't been challenged. It had been reclassified. Passengers weren't whispering now. They were staring. At Amara, at the phone in her hand, at the realization dawning too late. The senior flight attendant broke first. Her voice was quieter than before, stripped of performance. May I ask who you are? Amara looked at her for a long moment. Not with pride, not with anger, but with something closer to disappointment. You could have asked that an hour ago, she said, instead of deciding I didn't belong. A few heads nodded. Someone exhaled audibly. The pilot cleared his throat, desperate to anchor himself to procedure. If there's been a misunderstanding, he said, we can de-escalate. No need to involve. The board? Amara finished calmly. The word landed like a dropped tray. She turned slightly, enough for the cabin to feel included but not invited. My name is Amara Blake, she said. I am the founder and CEO of Blake Aerospace Group. The cabin didn't move. She let the name settle. I also happen to own a controlling share of this airline. That was it. The moment stories are built around. The moment air leaves lungs all at once. The woman in silver's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto her lap. Her face drained of color so fast it was almost theatrical. The pilot staggered back half a step, instinctively reaching for anything that could undo the last 10 minutes. You're lying, he said weakly. Amara didn't respond. She didn't have to. Rachel's voice came through the phone, firm and unmistakable. This is Rachel Nguyen, Chief of Operations. I can confirm Miss Blake's identity and authority. The younger flight attendant's hand flew to her mouth. A man near the aisle whispered, "Oh my God." The senior attendant closed her eyes. The pilot swallowed hard. I didn't know, he said quickly. If I had known. Amara turned to him fully now. That's the problem, she said. Her voice was still calm, still even, but it carried something final. You don't treat people with dignity unless you know who they are. She stepped closer, not threatening, not dramatic, just close enough for him to understand the weight of what she was saying. You questioned my presence. You ignored verification. You touched me. And you did it because you assumed I couldn't possibly matter. She gestured subtly to the cabin around them. This didn't become wrong because of my title, she continued. It was wrong before you knew my name. No one spoke. Even the engines seemed quieter. Amara turned slightly, addressing everyone now not as a CEO, but as a witness. I didn't raise my voice, she said. I didn't resist physically. I didn't ask for special treatment. She paused. I asked for the same treatment everyone else here received automatically. The woman in silver shrank into her seat, eyes fixed on the floor. The pilot's shoulders slumped, the uniform suddenly heavy. Performative. I'm sorry, he muttered. I made a judgment call. Amara nodded once. Yes, she said. You did. She lifted her phone again. Rachel, she said calmly, proceed. The line stayed open. Because the reveal wasn't the end. It was the trigger. And now finally the consequences could begin. The consequences didn't arrive loudly. They arrived efficiently. Rachel's voice remained on the line, steady and unhurried, the sound of systems already in motion. Captain James Holloway, she said, addressing the pilot by full name. Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty pending investigation. The words landed with surgical precision. The pilot's face went slack. You can't do that mid-flight, he protested. Reflex more than reason. We're not in flight, Rachel replied. And yes, we can. A ground supervisor's voice joined the call, layered and official. Sir, please hand over your credentials to the senior attendant. The senior attendant hesitated for half a second, then stepped forward, hand outstretched. The pilot stared at the insignia on his sleeve as if it had betrayed him. Slowly, mechanically, he unclipped his badge. A soft click. That sound, small, almost polite, was louder than any shout. Across the cabin, passengers exhaled. Someone began to clap, stopped themselves, then clapped again. This time, others joined. Not thunderous, not celebratory, measured, resolute. The woman in silver sat rigid, cheeks burning. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, notifications piling up, comments flipping from amusement to outrage in real time. She didn't look at them. Amara stood calmly, watching the system correct itself. No satisfaction, no triumph, just completion. Next, Rachel continued, we'll address crew conduct. The younger flight attendant straightened instinctively, fear flickering. Amara turned to her immediately. Not you, Amara said gently. You did your job. The attendant swallowed hard, eyes shining. Rachel went on. Senior attendant, you're suspended pending retraining review. Security will escort the relieved captain off the aircraft. A. Everman. The senior attendant nodded once, chastened, professional even in the fall. 2 uniformed ground officers appeared at the cabin door. The pilot hesitated just a breath, then stepped into the aisle. As he passed Amara, he slowed. I didn't know, he said again, quieter now. Amara met his eyes. You didn't need to. He looked away. As he was escorted off, a murmur followed him, not cruel, not mocking, just the sound of people recognizing accountability when they saw it. Amara turned back to the cabin. I want to be clear, she said, addressing the passengers. No one here is being punished because of me. She paused. They're being held responsible because of their choices. A man near the window nodded. About time. Rachel's voice softened slightly. Amara, compliance has flagged prior complaints involving the captain, unrelated incidents, similar patterns. Amara closed her eyes briefly. Not in surprise, in confirmation. Add them to the review, she said, and open a cabin-wide audit. Already done, Rachel replied. Replacement crew is boarding now. The door reopened. A new pilot stepped in, different posture, different presence. He met Amara's gaze and nodded respectfully, not knowing her story yet, only understanding the moment. The woman in silver finally stood, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I should delete that, she stammered. Amara looked at her, expression unreadable. That's up to you, she said. But understand this. What you filmed didn't create the truth. It revealed it. The woman sank back into her seat, smaller than before. As the cabin settled, a hush returned, not tense this time, but reflective. People looked at one another with the shared understanding of having witnessed something rare. Justice, not promised. Delivered. Amara returned to her seat. She picked up her book, smoothing the page where she had left off. Outside, the runway lights blinked patiently. The flight would resume soon. But for everyone on board, the destination had already changed, because they had seen what happens when power is quiet, and accountability finally speaks. The cabin settled into a new quiet. Not the tense stillness from before, but something steadier, earned. The replacement pilot moved with deliberate calm, checking instruments, speaking softly with the crew. Procedures resumed, systems aligned. Outside, the runway lights blinked in patient sequence, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But everyone on board knew better. Amara Blake sat back in seat 2A, her book still open, untouched. She hadn't turned a page since the moment it all began. She wasn't reading anymore. She was thinking. Across the aisle, passengers stole glances at her, not with curiosity now, but with respect. A woman mouthed, "Thank you." A man gave a small nod. The younger flight attendant passed by once more, eyes meeting Amara's, gratitude written plainly across her face. Amara nodded back. No speeches, no spotlight. Rachel's voice came through her phone one last time, quieter now. We're clear, Amara. Media has been alerted. Compliance teams are mobilized. I'll brief the board once you're airborne. Good, Amara said. And Rachel, make sure this doesn't end with a press release. There was a pause. Then, already drafting policy changes. One a day, Amara ended the call. The captain's voice, new, composed, came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We'll be departing shortly. A few seconds passed. Then, unexpectedly, Applause filled the cabin. Not loud, not performative, but sincere. Amara didn't stand. She didn't acknowledge it outwardly. She simply closed her book and placed it gently in her bag. As the plane began to taxi, she finally spoke again quietly, to no one and everyone. "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "I raised the standard." The engines roared to life, carrying them forward. Later, after takeoff, as the city lights faded beneath the clouds, a flight attendant approached Amara's seat. This time, she smiled. "Miss Blake," she said respectfully, "can I get you anything?" Amara looked up, met her eyes, and smiled faintly. "No," she said. "This is enough." Outside, the aircraft climbed smoothly, cutting through the night. Somewhere below, reports would be filed, jobs would be reviewed, training manuals rewritten. Quiet conversations would ripple through boardrooms and break rooms alike. But here, in this cabin, the lesson had already landed. Power doesn't need to announce itself. Dignity doesn't need permission. And justice doesn't require noise-only clarity. Amara leaned back as the seatbelt sign dimmed. For years, people had mistaken her calm for compliance. Tonight, they learned the difference. And as the plane disappeared into the dark sky, one truth lingered long after the lights below vanished. She didn't move seats. She moved the system.